Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, fellow delegates, last year at this August chamber, the international community shared concerns on the state of the world, conflicts and civil war, terrorism and violent extremism, climate change, epidemics, and grinding poverty. Unfortunately, this oversupply of problems and deficit of solutions remains unchanged. This sense of crisis paradoxically drew us together to achieve historic milestones, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. For the United Nations, 2016 marks the first year for the next 7 decades. It is also the first year for implementing the above landmark achievements. In an increasingly interconnected world that faces a daunting array of complex challenges, the United Nations' central role is crucial more than ever. In order to address this multi-layered equation in a sustainable way, the United Nations should heed calls for inclusive multilateralism, multilateral efforts to include the vulnerable, the isolated, and the unempowered. The World Humanitarian Summit last May and the high-level meetings on refugees this week represent part of this joint efforts in this regard. And most of all, we have the flagship blueprint for inclusive multilateralism, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is our promise for a world leaving no one behind. The Republic of Korea is often referred to as a success story for development. As such, we are ready to share our experiences for implementing the SDGs. Over the past year, my government launched major initiatives in the areas of education, women empowerment, science and technology, and rural development. We have introduced Korea Aid, a new development cooperation initiative, a mobile, customized service delivered to those in need. Vulnerable groups are already experiencing better health and medical services, as well as enjoying food and culture. The SDGs and the Paris Agreement are inextricably linked to the future of our planet and people. They should be mutually reinforcing and lead to a virtuous cycle. In this respect, as the host of the Green Climate Fund, GCF, my government is taking domestic steps to complete the ratification of the Paris Agreement as soon as possible within this year. The successful implementation of the SDGs relies on the strong anchor of peace and security, as well as respect for human rights. Peace, in the fullest sense, can be achieved only when peace and security, development and human rights are advanced together. This is the essence of the new concept of sustaining peace. This broadens peace building from post-conflict contexts to the whole spectrum of conflicts. We share the renewed awareness that conflict prevention should be mainstreamed in all UN activities. As was pointed out by many speakers this week, a frequent signal of looming conflicts is the violation of human rights. Reading the writing on the wall before it's too late is imperative in conflict prevention. We know this from experiences, for instance, in Syria, Libya, and in Afghanistan. Another symptom is the spread of violent extremism and terrorism. These are multifaceted challenges, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. We need a holistic, inclusive, and multi-stakeholder approach. Mr. President, this year, the United Nations embarks on its next 70 years. For us, 2016 is also an important symbolic year. 25 years ago, the Republic of Korea, together with the DPRK, became a UN member state. Two Koreas were admitted simultaneously, but we had a dream then that in the future there would be one Korea, just like one reunified Germany in 1991. Looking back on the track record of these two members, there could be no starker contrast. Like President Obama remarked earlier this week at this August chamber, one has come to the path of success, while the other has become a wasteland. The reason why North Korea has failed is because of its fanatical and reckless pursuit of nuclear and missile programs, among other things. North Korea is the first and only country which has conducted nuclear tests in this century. It has conducted 5 nuclear tests so far in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. Just yesterday, at the CTBT Friends Ministerial meeting, 43 countries issued a joint statement condemning in the strongest terms Pyongyang's nuclear tests. North Korea is the first and only country which has developed nuclear weapons programs within the NPT regimes and announced its withdrawal from both the IAEA and the NPT. North Korea is also the first and only country which has officially declared itself as a nuclear weapon state in its constitution. North Korea's recent nuclear tests show that its nuclear programs have neared the tipping point. The latest nuclear test was the strongest ever. The test interval was also significantly reduced from average 3 years to 8 months. Given North Korea's unpredictability and its penchant for provocations, its next nuclear provocations may come even sooner than we expect. Moreover, North Korea has also fired 22 ballistic missiles of all types this year alone. This means 1 ballistic missile almost every 10 days. These nuclear and ballistic missile tests show that North Korea is now at the final stage of nuclear weaponization. Even more worryingly, North Korea has not only advanced its nuclear and missile capacity, but publicly threatened the actual use of these weapons. It has blackmailed to use nuclear weapons preemptively, which can strike us in 4 to 5 minutes. With such a direct existential threat to our survival, my government has no choice but to take necessary defensive measures to protect the nation and the citizens. In the wake of the 5th nuclear test, the Security Council agreed to work immediately on appropriate measures under Article 41. It's currently discussing a new resolution on North Korea. The Security Council should adopt stronger, comprehensive sanctions measures that go beyond Resolution 2270. It should close the loopholes in that resolution and further expand and reinforce existing sanctions measures. In this context, we need to answer a more fundamental question. North Korea's repeated violations and non-compliance of Security Council resolutions and international norms is unprecedented and has no parallel in the history of the United Nations. It shows that North Korea is totally ridiculing the authority of the UN Security Council and, as such, the United Nations itself. It is crystal clear that North Korea, as a serial offender, has manifestly failed to uphold its pledge to abide by the obligations in the UN Charter, particularly to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. Therefore, I believe it's high time to seriously reconsider whether North Korea is qualified as a peace-loving UN member, as many countries are already questioning. Recently, at the East Asia Summit held in Laos, my president warned that unless we put a brake on Pyongyang's nuclear ambition today, we will come to regret it tomorrow. This is our last chance. Mr. President, North Korea's fifth nuclear test not only revealed its unambiguous nuclear ambition, but it also exposed its utter disregard for its own people. At a time of the worst flood in decades, North Korea went ahead with the nuclear test in the hardest hit region. It is estimated that North Korea has spent at least $200 million for this year's nuclear test and missile firing, a sufficient sum that could have been used for the flood relief. 2 years ago, the report of the Commission of Inquiry was an eye-opener for the entire world on North Korea's systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations. We saw its reports spread to the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, the Security Council, and even beyond. We live in an age of greater accountability. North Korea's human rights abuses should no longer be allowed any impunity. It is a common responsibility to protect the people of North Korea when its regime is defiantly refusing to do so. Now is the time for action. First, the international community's human rights mechanisms must take more robust measures. The group of independent experts on accountability is to recommend practical mechanisms of accountability for human rights violations in the DPRK, in particular, violations amounting to crimes against humanity. Second, we need to sharpen our focus on North Korea's so-called state-sponsored forced labor abroad. There should be greater scrutiny on human rights of North Korean workers abroad and the possible diversion of their wages into North Korea's WMD programs. Third, the international community should pay great attention to the yearnings of North Koreans for freedom and human dignity. They deserve greater access to the realities of the outside world. On our part, we recently enacted the North Korea Human Rights Act. This is a reflection of the nationwide consensus that we should no longer ignore the human rights situation in North Korea. Mr. President, this year marks the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's 10th year in office. This is the last UN General Assembly during his term. Let me commend his commitment and leadership, as well as his remarkable achievements in a range of areas, most notably on climate change, sustainable development, gender equality, humanitarian assistance, and UN management reform. I believe that Secretary General Ban has greatly strengthened the role and status of the United Nations by overcoming the unprecedented challenges during this age of great transformation. The United Nations is currently on its way to choose his successor. I am confident that the next Secretary General will strive to make the organization more efficient and stronger by building on his legacy. The founding principles of the Republic of Korea is at one with the spirit of the United Nations charters, we the peoples. I hope that this General Assembly, representing the peoples of the world, will serve to increase the confidence on the United Nations as the beacon of hope in this turbulent world. Let me assure you that my country will remain a staunch supporter of the United Nations in its important and vital mission. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République de Corée.